Hey everyone, welcome to class. It's Trevor, and I post D&D videos every week on Wednesdays. In this video, I wanted to do a pretty bare bones tips for DMing style video. So I'm going to talk about my 5 top tips, especially for beginner DMs. For tip number 1, my biggest advice is to start simple. This sounds pretty simplistic, but with a hobby like D&D, there's so much out there. There's a lot of homebrew, there are a lot of published books, and there are a lot of people who are very fully invested into it. And that can get, understandably, really overwhelming, especially for new players. I kind of hate the gatekeeping aspects that are associated with this game. I would strongly encourage you to start with a one-shot or a simplistic adventure like The Lost Minds of Phandelver or the Essentials kit that came out more recently. These are designed as more closed off, encapsulated, either one or a couple of session adventures, and they make the overwhelming process of DMing, because let's be honest, it is overwhelming, more manageable. You can see the forest through the trees. If you compare this to trying to run any of the published material, those campaign books are so much more thorough, which are really advantageous for more experienced DMs or long-term tables, but they can be really overwhelming for newer players. So start simple. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in that. For tip number 2, I'm going to say know the rules with a caveat. I can't verbally put an asterisk, right? So from my experience, at least, as the DM, you kind of become the arbiter of the rules at your table. But let's face it, no DM has all of the rules memorized. There are plenty of clip compilations of Matt Mercer and the Critical Role guys getting the rules wrong. When I say know the rules, what I'm referring to is know the rules in terms of character creation and know how to make your table run smoothly. No one expects you to have an encyclopedic knowledge of D&D 5e. I don't, and I've been playing this game for close to 5 or 6 years now. But instead, you should know how to answer questions that your players might have, and arguably, and maybe this is a variation of the tip, maybe not know the rules, but know how to look them up, and offer with your table to look it up together. Let's say you're in the middle of combat and one of your players is trying to use an improvisational weapon or is trying to grapple someone else or something like that, and it's a more complex ruling. You can always fall back on, this is what we're going to do for now, but I'll look into it afterward. Because there are times where I'll get so hung up on how should this technically work, it throws my entire game table off. Technically doesn't matter in the moment. You can learn technically outside of the game table. And you can, again, then adapt moving forward. An understanding table will know that, and they will not begrudge you for it. And when push comes to shove, the rule of cool exists for a reason. If your table is running something a particular way, and it's working for your table, keep doing it. There's nothing wrong with that. For tip number 3, I'm going to say consume content. This sounds kind of absurd as a tip for new Dungeon Masters, but I am only as confident as I am being a DM because of watching other DMs. I've watched Critical Role for quite some time. I listened to the Adventure Zone prior to that, and I cannot recommend, especially the balance arc, enough. I've watched episodes of Dimension 20, and watching all of these different DMs and how they run their game helped me develop my own style. And then there's a layer beyond that. It kind of leveled up from just watching actual play content, and now I'm also consuming content like this video with tips and tricks and homebrew that's all over YouTube. To name a few channels, and I'll link plenty more in the description, there's Matt Coleville, and his Running the Game series is invaluable. There's Dael Kingsmill, XP to level 3, WebDM, Dungeon Dudes, Dungeon Coach, Dungeon Dad, a lot of dungeons going on, Zipperon Disney. There's so much out there. Ginny D, I could list for hours. I consume a lot of D&D content, and it gives me so many ideas and gets my brain spinning with how I'm going to incorporate some of that at the table, or even if I'm doing something in my game, and then I watch a video where someone else is doing it, I feel validated for some reason, right? Like that's incredible. So for tip number 4, I'm going to say balance preparation with improv. When you're a new DM on the spectrum of prep and improv, you're probably going to be more on the preparation side, and there's nothing wrong with that. You should read the entire module before you play it. You should be prepared to play the game, especially because the DM kind of becomes the de facto head of the table. Not always, but it's just often the case. But from my experience, my best game sessions are sometimes the games I plan the least. I have a random encounter table planned, and I have an idea of what my table's goals are, but I don't have every moment planned out. Sub-tip as part of this: avoid if-then statements when you're planning for a D&D game. I'm pretty sure I've heard this somewhere, but I don't remember where. If-then statements are a trap because your players may never do the if, and then the then doesn't happen. Instead, you need to plan for eventualities and possibilities. And that gives you the flexibility to think on your feet and make the game engaging and fun. It's overwhelming and it's difficult, especially at first. But if you need, in the moment, if you're at the table and you are kind of unsure and you need a second to plan a combat encounter or roll on a couple of random encounter whatever it is, you can let your table know, hey guys, just give me a sec. This is going a little bit off of what my plans were. Give me 5 minutes, go eat some snacks, whatever. And when we come back, we'll reconvene and this will be awesome, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And then for tip number 5, I'm going to say, feel out the tone of your table. I tend to run D&D games for my friends and family. I've also run D&D games for my students after school to introduce the game to them. And obviously, the tone of those games is different. And the tone of a game that I would run for complete strangers would be different still. You need to know what kind of game your friends or your group is looking to play. Do they want it to be open world and this exploration driven? Or do they want it to be heavy into role play? Do they want it to be more linear, right? Online, in a lot of D&D discourse, there's so much focus on how bad railroading is. And it's true. Railroading can be awful. If you have no autonomy over your character as a player, it's very frustrating. But on the flip side, some people, my table is a good example, don't like completely open world games because it feels aimless. It's a matter of knowing what your table wants. What are people's hard no's? What are their hesitancies? A lot of this can be resolved in a session 0, and I can do a video on session 0 if there's any interest in that. I think it's a brilliant idea. But the important thing is to just know what your table is looking for when it comes to your specific game. To kind of wrap this up, I think most of the advice is communicate, have fun, and be able to admit when you don't know something. I think that there's a lot of power in that. And this is maybe too heady and philosophical for a D&D video, but whether it's in your planning or in the moment about a ruling, whatever it is, there is not only nothing wrong, but I would say there's something good about saying, I don't know what the rule is for that, but we can figure it out. And this is obviously my profession bleeding into being a dungeon master. But I've had a lot of success with my students. If they ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I say, I don't know what that is, but we can figure it out together. Or I'll look into it and I'll get back to you, depending on the circumstance. Not only do I think there's nothing wrong with that, I think it is humanizing, it breaks down barriers, and it makes this whole experience, both D&D and, life, it just makes it more enjoyable. And that's my whole goal. So, as always, thanks for listening, guys. If you have any questions or feedback you want to give me, drop it in the comments below. And be safe. Make smart life choices.